Let's start talking about you and UTK and your experiences. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to start out simply by saying what I have read is that you were a young man at the University of Tennessee going to college, and I believe Gus Manning sort of ran into you, or you already knew him. You were maybe at Kroger, and he said, "Hey, have you ever thought about coming to work over at UTK in some capacity?" Do you mind to tell that a little bit?
Well, I guess my real claim to fame was I was Gus Manning's paper boy. He always said I wasn't a very good one. His dog even bit me one time when I was trying to get the paid for the paper that his wife paid for. But I was working at Kroger, going to school part time, and Gus happened to go into this Kroger store. It was in Western Plaza. 739 was the number of that store, and he said that Haywood Harris needed a student assistant. They were hiring a new student assistant. Said, I think you ought to go down there and talk to Haywood. And I did, and Haywood hired me at the princely sum of $75 a month. And so I went to work. I was a junior at that time at school. That was been in 64, 65. And I worked the next year in 66. And then when I graduated in June of 66, Coach Woodruff hired me as the first full-time assistant in media relations. The funny thing about this is kind of interesting now, and I tell the story. When I first started, I got $75 a month. Well, Haywood said, well, look, Coach Woodruff said you could work basketball season. So I said, that'd be fine. I was still working part-time. My father, unfortunately, died in the World War II. And so I was on a GI Bill. So I was working at Kroger on a GI Bill. So money wasn't really the factor. I was okay education-wise. But so I got my check in January. It was $40. And so I went to Haywood and I said, Haywood, I got $75 during football season, but now I get $40. I said, what happened? He said, well, Coach Woodruff said you weren't as busy. So we figured it out by hours and everything, and it came out to 11 cents an hour. Gus Manning happened to walk in at that time and was telling Gus, as a Gus, my benefactor, he knows me, he's going to take care of this. We told him the same story. He looked at Haywood and said, he's not worth a dime, and walked out. True story.
I believe you. I believe you. Uh, what all kinds of things did you do? Because I'm going to be honest with you. If I were you, I probably would have walked into work every day thinking, I'm getting paid to do this work. This is amazing. What did you do?
Well, the reason I was first hired, it was that Haywood, there was one man shop. So Haywood Harris was covering all the sports. At that time, we only had men's sports. And so he was covering all the sports and traveling with both football and basketball teams. So the first thing I did, I became the basketball travel person, the basketball SID, and I did that for about 26 years. I worked all the football games. Sometimes basketball season, we would be out of town when we played a home football game. I might miss a football game because of basketball, but that was first what happened. And then as time went on, we were able to put another student assistant and finally enlarge the department because you couldn't get to all those. But Haywood basically was, Haywood had great vocabulary, a tremendous writer. He had newspaper background. Uh, I was just the organizer, more than organizer. It'd take me a pretty good while to write a release that he could do in 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
But combination of us together made us, I think, a very strong group and a very strong department that we had. I didn't want his job. He didn't want mine. And so for 26 years we did that. Then we hired another assistant. I moved more into the management, more into football and other sports, baseball and track, and all those were all involved. And we kind of grew along that way. But in the start, it was just two-man team.
Now that would be impossible to do. You would say there's no way that two people can do that.
I don't think you could. One, you have such a big demand now on social media. You got to know at the time that I was working, there was no such thing as the internet. There wasn't PDF. There wasn't JPEG. None of those things were. So what you had were paper files. You created releases. You took them, when I started, took them to the Western Union to put a story. If we wanted a story in Nashville paper, we'd take it to local Western Union. They would send it by wire. In fact, in the press box, the only women in the press box at the time were the Western Union people, Western Union ladies who would transfer the the writers' stories back to their papers. And that was, that's in the 60s there. Obviously, with the advent of where we are now, electronically, both as TV certainly changed quite a bit from having to do a story and do the film and do all that, wait 3 days and then put it up. I mean, you have instant success, and that's where athletic department is. That makes it hard. You have to have a lot of people in there to manage that end of it. And right now, each of our sports has a contact person, and he's pretty busy, and she's pretty busy, both of them within those sports. So it kind of transitioned quickly, very, very quickly, into where two people shop was going to be very difficult to manage.
Just to pick up the narrative, then we fast forward to where you've got more help. And when do you become like the sports information guy?
Well, not until Haywood retired.
Okay.
Haywood wanted to retire, and when he retired, I became the associate AD for media relations at the time. Certainly, we had very, very capable people around me, and that was a good fortune of mine. Students today that you're hiring are really, really talented students. And we had a bunch of students and a bunch of personnel people that were really good. And so I did that until I retired in 2011. It was about 10 years. Haywood retired, was a historian, a position that Coach Woodruff and Coach Dickey created for him at the time, and so he did that for a period of time. He was still involved, but more, as writing stories and releases and things. And then I managed somewhat the office at that time until I retired in 2011.
And then from 2011, you became...
Well, in 2011, I was retired. In
Yeah.
2018, Coach Fulmer became the athletic director. Certainly, I had a relationship with Coach Fulmer, and he decided that he wanted to create and reestablish the historian position, and I did that, going up until this last December.
Well, it was a good idea. I mean,
Right.
I think UT needed one.
Well, you don't need history till you need history.
Well,
You know what I'm saying? You don't need it until you actually need it. And then when you need it, then you have to find that source. Is that source going back to your area where you have tapes, or where is that? And so there's always something that was coming up historically. Right now, the folks in the media relations office, they are really concentrating on their sports right now. And they don't have a lot of time if a request comes in to go search something out. And that's a lot of what I did. I did a lot of research on things, did a lot of sorting files down, where I gathered files for 40-something, 46 years that were paper files, and I had 10 copies of every media guide, because at that time, if you didn't have that, you didn't have anything. Took some things over to the library for historical preservation at the University Library, which they have a good collection of things now. And so there were a lot of things that a person who didn't have a sport responsibility could help in the office, and that's what I did. And I certainly enjoyed it. And I still get calls today for different things that come up. A couple of requests already this week.
well, we'll probably still bother you if it's
Right.
okay.
Which is fine. I expect that. I mean, you might dissolve a position, but you won't dissolve the need to have somebody who has a contact with it.
The three of us are, I suppose you could say, our old timers, in the sense that we've lived long enough to appreciate history, institutional knowledge, how things change or don't change over
Right.
time, versus we have a lot of young people that are in our profession,
Right.
have no idea, even some who aren't from here, and don't realize maybe some of the amazing things that have gone on even 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Generally talking, people ask me all the time, what are your favorite games? What's the best player you saw? I always had moments in time is what I remember. A 99-yard run. Only seen one since I've been in all the years there. Kelsey Finch went 99 yards against Florida in 77. Moving on up to, there was a guy named Ivory Crockett. Ivory Crockett ran for Southern Illinois. But Ivory Crockett ran a 9-flat 100 on Tom Black track, which is still considered the record because they moved to meters. But that was run on our track one day, and you saw that. I think of the other things that happened. We had the fastest man afloat, a guy named Dave Edgar, who was right at the 20-second mark on swimming the 50 free and the 100 free, a very good athlete. I think of Billy Graham. You know that Billy Graham Crusade was the first stadium event that drew attendance in Neyland Stadium.
1970, I think.
Right, 1970. There have been others since then. We had Michael Jackson concert. Yeah. Came back with Garth Brooks, did one. The Promise Keepers had something in there. Morgan Wallen, Kenny Chesney have had it. But the very first one was 1970, and that was the first spectator event other than a football contest in the stadium. 1958, we played Chattanooga. A lot of people don't remember this, but Chattanooga tore down the goalpost that day. That's the first time a goalpost had been torn down in Neyland Stadium. It wasn't done by Tennessee. It was done by Chattanooga.
That's
in
impolite.
1950 when they won that game.
That's impolite.
Now, we've torn the goalpost down a few times. And then I think about some great players. Now, my list of players that I like and I consider that I saw play is going to be totally different than someone else. But I will say that I think the best all-around player in my mind was Peyton Manning because of academics, because of media understanding, because of commitment to the university, his skills as an athlete. And there's others in there. There's a guy named Ron Whidbey. A lot of people may not remember him, but he went to Fulton High School. He's the last four-sport letterman at Tennessee. He played 4 sports. He was All-America in football. He was All-America in basketball, played for Coach Ray Mears, played football for Coach Dickey, punted. He also played on the baseball team, batted .300 one year. And he also played on the golf team, was a par 72 golfer. He was at one time a professional sport person in 3 sports. He played NBA basketball, he played football for the Dallas Cowboys, and he was a pro and played on the circuit, the senior circuit, and the PGA golf. I think about him. Condrich Holloway. Mm-hmm. He was a legend before legends. Mm-hmm. Back then, people didn't get autographs of people like they do now. Condrich Holloway was the first person of noteworthy where people wanted his autograph. And that was always an interesting thing there. He was the first black quarterback, too. And you move on down, Richmond Flowers. Now, that's an older name. Where does he fit into this? Richmond Flowers was the most highly recruited athlete back in the 65, 66 era, 64. And the reason was he was a good track athlete, a hurdler, world-class hurdler, but he also played football. That was the first of those dual sport athletes where we had wide receivers, defensive backs who ran on the track team and then came in and played football. And so I remember those kinds of things stick out. Now, there's a few games too, but individually that's that. If you go to a second group, you got to think about Reggie White, great player, 15 sacks his senior year. You move on down the line, A.W. Davis was a local guy from Rutledge who helped Coach Mears, and certainly Al Wilson, who willed the championship team. I know T. Martin was a great quarterback, but Al Wilson was the leader of that. And that's some of the individuals anyway, and I got some games too. Okay, people like Ernie Berry. I think Ernie was a very savage player, and I like him to some extent as well as I like Bernard. Bernard was the greatest player at his size that I've seen at 6'7" and what he could do. But Grunfeld was a really savvy player, and I really like Grunfeld. Those two guys together, I traveled with them obviously as a basketball team during that time, and they fit in there pretty well too.
I moved here in '93, and I was not from Tennessee, although I have people who are from Tennessee. So I very quickly learned to appreciate all that Tennessee involves and the great history and what have you. One of those people that I came to love was John Ward, just simply listening to him cover games.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about John Ward and what he meant to you, or what you think he meant to sort of the richness of all of UT sports?
Well, I think John, obviously, when he first came to the University of Tennessee and be involved with broadcasting, he was a public address announcer for the football games. But at that time, he was also doing basketball games. And so at the time when George Mooney, who had been the broadcaster at the time with Bob Fox, retired, and John not only was doing basketball games, he then moved out of the football realm of doing the PA announcing to become the voice of the Vols. We traveled with John a lot, particularly back then. Basketball played 2 games on the road. They played on Saturday and Monday at that time. And then they play at home on Saturday and Monday, and that was an 18-game round-robin deal. So I spent many, many times with John. Certainly, he was very well prepared. And the thing I like about John, a lot of people like him in football because he had good things to say. He had some nice little give him six, 5, 4, 3, 2. Had some things to add in, cliches if you want to call it. In basketball, if you ever listened to him on the radio in basketball, you knew where the ball was. You knew how to follow the flow of the game. You knew if it's left wing, that whoever the person was guarding him, he had his name. If it was in the free throw line, maybe down in the baseline, wherever it was, he could paint that picture for you in basketball. I know he's good in football, but I think in basketball he was excellent, the best that I've heard. And he would paint it the way it was and describe it. You know, announcers are supposed to be homers. You can look around the league. Kaywood Ledford of Kentucky, Munson, who did Georgia, they're supposed to be homers. But they're also supposed to be knowledgeable about presentation of the game. And John could handle both of those. One of his greatest calls in football, I think, was Willie Gault took a opening kickoff or a kickoff back, and he said, "Is Willie Gault running all the way to the state capitol?" And those were things that he would add in there as a homer, so to speak, but yet presenting the game. So John certainly was a unique personality. He had a great ability, too, because he was in advertising. That was his main job. He created and sold the Doug Dickey Show. And we first started our television production with the coaches. Obviously, it generated additional funding and things like that. But he did a great job in molding that and involving those TV shows to what they are now and the basics of what he did. And at that time, we were probably a forerunner in what we were doing. Golden Flake was a major advertiser, Golden Flake potato chips, and Ward was a real catalyst in how he did that, not only calling the games, but promoting us on radio and television.
If you don't mind, sort of along the lines of you alluded that people often ask you about your favorite players, what about your favorite coaches? We've had some great ones at the University of Tennessee. We also, especially with the football program, we had a rough patch,
Right.
to put it nicely.
Well, I was kind of on the ground floor of Tennessee athletics with Gus and Haywood. When I first started working in the athletic department, there were probably 7 administrative people. I'm not talking about the coaches. I'm talking about 7 people who were basically involved in running the department, and I was one of those. So I was on the ground floor. And certainly the coaches, we were very close to the coaches. You know, when Coach Dickey, my first real coach was Coach Dickey, involvement with him, and moved on with Coach Battle and through the line there, Coach Majors and others. Certainly, all of them were unique, and I had a great relation. Basketball-wise, I had a great relationship with all those basketball coaches, but I really liked Don DeVoe. I think he was a unique kind of coach, and he did a lot of things there. Ray Mears and Stu Avenue were a little different, and they were certainly building that program and involvement. And then you move down the line to others. Here, Coach Barnes has picked up on that and moved the team. I liked all the coaches. I hope they always accused me that I was a better coach on Monday when I tell them how they played the game than they were on Saturday. But I shared some times with them. Coach Fulmer certainly was a coach. He was a player. He was an assistant coach. He's a head coach. He's an athletic director. He had the 4 positions there. The only other person that did that in the athletic department might have been Bowden White for a short period of time. Bowden White played. He was assistant coach, and he was head coach, and he was AD at one time, right when General Nealon passed for a short period of time. But Philip had that unique perspective to see all the different aspects of it.
And you saw all of that. You saw him when he played in the late
Right.
60s. You knew
I
him.
used to chase him for interviews.
To grab him and
To
say, "Come
grab his,
here."
hey, they want to talk to you after the game. I always try to get a lineman. A lineman would always come and talk because nobody talked to him in the middle of the week. So a lot of times the lineman, offensive lineman, you could convince him to come do an interview, talk about the game, particularly if he won. Sometimes the quarterback hadn't played so well and you're trying to get the running back, may have fumbled or something, and they were hard to get, but I could always depend on a lineman. And Coach Fulmer was kind of one of those guys along with a lot of others, but and he was unique. Coach Dickey was he had some tough situations in Coach Dickey's career. We had 3 coaches killed
Yes.
in 1965.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw Coach Dickey, and I was young at that time,
Mm-hmm.
right in there. I was a young guy, and I saw Coach Dickey just manage that whole situation as a coach. And then when he came back as athletic director, I even saw even more of his skills. Coach Dickey's very, very good athletic director. One thing about Coach Dickey, if you're a head coach and you're in an offensive room and a quarterback coach wants to do this and the running back coach says, I want to give it to Billy Smith, and somebody else is saying, well, why don't we throw a pass out here? Well, the head coach's got to decide what that play's going to be. Well, one thing about Coach Dickey, you could work with him. You could tell him what your thoughts were. He may not totally agree, but he would listen to you, and that's a great trait. And then he would decide here's what I think we'll do. But I thought that was a great attribute to him. And if he was to walk into a room today, Coach Dickey would take over that room. His statue and the way he handled it. So I think he, in my mind, was a really, really good athletic director. And to think that leaving the program and going to Florida and then coming back, I never imagined that Coach Dickey would ever come back to Tennessee. But when he did, he made great impact. Sure did. In fact, I talked to him last week. He's writing his memoirs. He's got somebody doing a book. So I was involved with getting some photos and things and some historical information that he might want, making sure he had the records right and things like that. Coach Battle also wrote a book at one time, a pretty good book, coaches about his life, and I think so. There's touch a lot of people in a lot of different ways. One time, Coach Woodruff had retired. He retired. Coach Dickey came on as athletic director. About 4 or 5 years later, Coach Woodruff calls me. He wants me to do this, wants me to do that. And I just kiddingly said, well, Coach, I don't work for you. He said, Ford, you'll always work for me. And so I got a call from Coach Fulmer today on some stuff. And that's just that's the contact. And since I've been here, I'm a local product, lived in Knoxville my whole life. Never went anywhere else to live and worked at the university. And so, that's a uniqueness I have, and I'm privileged to be able to do that.
I think that's also has been traditionally one of the strengths of the University of Tennessee, in the sense that you have people who are from East Tennessee or Tennessee who went to the university, who get it, who have been through all of it, and are not going to leave. They are here to continue to carry on the culture.
Right. I think the administration was that way for a long period of time. Andy Holt, Dr. Bowling, Dr. Johnson, Eli Fly, and others were consistent. At one time, 70 years, the sports information director at Tennessee was a Tennessee graduate, starting with Lindsey Nelson, all the way through Gus in 51, Haywood in 61, and then when I came in, for that 60-something year period, that person was a graduate of the University of Tennessee. And in fact, Tom Sokoviak, who later followed me, he was also a graduate. So we had a period of time of consistency, I guess you might say, but you had people, and there are other schools that have it, but it's not as prevalent, I don't think, as it was in the past.
As I listen to you talk, what I'm struck by, Mr. Ford, is that you weren't a man who sort of worked for any particular person, but you worked sort of at large, it sounds like. And in your mind, you worked at large for, if you don't mind me saying, the greater good of the university and athletics. Am I mischaracterizing?
I was always, Haywood and Gus and we always talked about it. When you have decisions, you have to figure out what is the best. And I was always taught that the best thing is to do what is best for the university first. Then second is it better for the coach? Is it better for the player? Or is it better for the media? So sometimes each one of those is a better position that you take. But I always worked, I thought, for the university and for the athletic director. I necessarily wasn't an employee of a particular coach. I was working for the university. A lot of times coaches come in and they make changes along that line where they have their own person or something like that. I've always felt like that you got to be neutral in that, and my emphasis is always to do what's best for the university. And a couple of times, that may not have been the right call, but you had to make that call. Haywood Harris was really good at reading what an incident would happen and how the reaction was going to be from the media.
Mm-hmm.
What's the hot point?
Mm-hmm.
What are they looking? Where is going to be this point? And he was able to really fend off a lot of things that would come because of that ability. We had a newspaper background, and that was really an advantage to him. I learned a lot from him and Gus as well.
Mm-hmm. I want to shift to sort of adversity, if you will.
Okay.
It is not something that is normal or regular, fortunately for UT. There have been some rough patches.
Right.
Two I want to ask you about in particular. You know about one I'm going to ask you about just to get it on the record. But before I get to that one, I just am curious, considering your position and what you were doing, that period of time when like the football program just kind of lost its leadership momentum period, and they'd bring a coach in and it was just not quite the right fit. They'd try for a few years. Didn't work out, bring another one in, same thing, not quite a good fit. What was it like going through that? And you may disagree with what I've just said. I don't know.
No, it's difficult. In the way the strength of the athletic department at Tennessee right now has always been in the football program. And you can have as good of other sports as you want. It's not going to hinder their growth like basketball or baseball, whatever. But your football program is your doorstep. And when things aren't right with that, it's a challenge. One, financially it can be a challenge to university, but more of upheaval, as you call it, happening. Certainly changing coaches is always the hardest time because it's like you have a sandbox and somebody all of a sudden draws the middle of that sandbox and half the people are for the coach, half the people against the coach. Generally, I was always more towards the coach because I had worked with him, I knew what he was doing, but yet I still had to maintain integrity about what we were doing and move forward with the new coach. So those things are very difficult at times, and that's one of the hard things that faces an athletic department. I think you have to have a plan in place if you're going to replace a coach. You have to have an idea of what you would do as an administrator if you were going to replace your coach. Where would you go? And I felt like at the time that Coach Former was let go, maybe we didn't have the right plan, and it proved to be that's what occurred until we have gotten to this point.
A lot of people would agree with you.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
How do you deal with a press, a media that has kind of changed? And let me tell you where I'm coming from with that. For so long, it was a stable, predictable group of people. It was your newspaper people. You knew them well. I worked at the News Sentinel for 18 years. You knew all those people, Gary and John and Strange, and all of them. Stable group, same with other newspapers that would cover Tennessee. TV, also pretty much stable. You knew who you were dealing with. And then we've had several things happen. We've had the explosion, as you mentioned when we started this conversation, of social media, which has just blown everything, into a new atmosphere, if you will. Plus, you don't have as many of your journalists who cover, it doesn't matter, UT, sports, doesn't matter, whatever it is, they don't stay around here very long. That has to make it kind of difficult to feel like you're doing your job in a sense that that is satisfactory to you if you've got all these different people. You don't have as much of a personal touch, and many of them may even be trying just to sort of take advantage of you or the program or get the soundbite and not feel like they're accountable.
Well, I think the main thing about all of it is journalism integrity. You have to have journalism integrity. And with that comes your responsibility as a journalist to have a few backups that support what direction you're coming from. With the rise of internet and social media groups that are establishing their own things, that became a challenge to every school along the way. Who was really a reporter and who was maybe a private guy, fan who was getting into it. So that process, it took a little while. There are certainly some very, very reputable internet operations going on right now, and a lot of them cover Tennessee. Other schools have them, but journalism integrity, whether you're doing radio or television or print, there has to be the integrity in there that you want to be responsible that you're reporting what's correct. And when that gets out of skew, then that starts a whole bunch of other things that aren't accurate, and you can't draw it back. And so that's been a real challenge, I think, and SIDs work with that to try to sort out who really is interested in their website and how they're doing it. Certainly the papers have lost some. Television is now a real factor. When I first started, it wasn't, as I explained. You took it in 16 millimeter film, you had to go in and develop it, and the story might be 2 days later before you do it. That's not the case. You became a player. And so that's one. And I think radio reporting, and now everybody has a camera. Everybody has a camera on their phone, a very quality camera. And so the one thing that has occurred with it, there's not as many one-on-ones. That now it's a group at a certain time, players going to be available before game, after game. Not a lot of one-on-one where guys can create a story, to develop a personality with that story, or get a real good thumbnail about a player. Not a lot of that occurring because of the structure more than anything else.
But accessibility is really important in the work
Right.
that we do,
Right.
and it's a lot harder to have
Right.
that access to a player, a coach, whoever today than ever, I would say.
When I first started, there were two newspapers in town,
Mm-hmm.
Knoxville Journal and Knoxville News Sentinel.
Mm-hmm.
Highly competitive. And if the Journal called me and wanted to talk to the quarterback, then I would set up the quarterback for him.
Mm-hmm.
If the Sentinel called and wanted to set up the quarterback, I'd set up the quarterback for him. I couldn't dare say that, well, hey, the Journal's already talked to him. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I couldn't say that because I did what he requested. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, the Journal would run the story in the morning. He's worked to do it in the afternoon, and it's gone. So you had that real competitive edge. And that's not occurring because there's so many. There is a competitive edge, but it's going to be hard for him not to have real good journalism integrity because they're all getting it at the same time, hearing what is said at the same time. There are some one-on-ones. They still do some good one-on-ones. And in a second area, and I don't say this in a bad way, with the advent of the internet, then the athletic department now became its own news source. We have the ability to put out our stories whenever we want to, and individuals and doing certain things with privacy and things. So we became a little bit of a player in this news world. Not a controller, but yet a player, because we were putting out a lot of stuff on our website that people were going to, and so that kind of changed some of that, as I see it, during that time.
Probably going to go even more in that direction, I
Right,
would guess.
right.
I mean, that's strategic. It's smart.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Bill Shorey, Lane Kiffin episode. and I walk into this sort of chuckling like you because, I mean, I was working at the News Sentinel that night, and I was watching it unfold from that perspective. I was not here then, but obviously it is something that people here still remember and talk about. rightly or wrongly, or maybe having a perception of it that's not quite right, but I would love to hear your recollection of it. And let me just tell you that from our perception, it appeared that we wanted and felt that it was appropriate that Lane Kiffin come out and talk on camera because he should do that. That's what should be done for him as he got ready to go, having only been here a year. And there was this tussle, standoff, whatever you want to call it, with you sort of in the middle trying to coordinate it or not, and him kind of hiding somewhere saying he wanted to address the press, but he didn't want to go on camera. And you may or may not have been painted in a correct or incorrect light. So talk about that.
Well, I know this. When I die, that video will come out. It will never die. It's an unusual night. One that obviously I thought that particular night I didn't take care of the university. I will admit that. I went to Lane. I had been to church, and I was getting out of Wednesday night church, and I got a call from Tiffany Carpenter, who was a public relations girl who helped us at the time, and that Lane had come over. We got a press conference at 8:30. So I go over, and Lane is here, and he's telling me what he wanted to do, and I'm telling Lane, you need to leave. No coach does a press conference in the town that he's leaving. He goes to the other school, other place, and then he talks about that school, but he doesn't do it here. Well, that Lane didn't want to do that. The second thing that complicated it was he wanted to go into the press conference, and he wanted to talk about it first and then have the cameras turned on. That created an issue. Hindsight says I should have said, Lane, they're ready for you. Let him walk in the room, and whatever happened, because he wasn't our employee. Well, I tried to, knowing I worked with a coach, I attempted to try to see if his wishes could be happen, and it did not happen. And there was no one in that press conference looked good, particularly the moderator, who the camera was on most of the time. No one looked good in that. The second thing was we were putting it in a room that had no access. We weren't doing it in a place where we normally had set up, where we had camera locations and we could get, it was set up in a ballroom and cables running everywhere, total confusion, trucks parking on sidewalks. So it was a big mess, students outside. And it was just a chaotic situation that once they got in there, and everybody took a stand. Now Bill Story took a stand, but see, the people in the room at the time, it was an off news time. It was 8:30, 9 o'clock. That's not a normal people who cover athletics. There were some of them there, but this was a news story. So you had people who normally don't work within our range. We had some limitations of how you cover practice and when you could talk to a player. If there was a fight on the field, you didn't report it. If a coach and a player are going at, those things weren't reportable. Well, now we're in an open world. And that created a little issue because they weren't normally used to structure, if that makes sense. And so it just went on, and finally, a young person who taped it all, and the only thing that vindicated me was, remember when Tennessee played Mississippi? Lane Kiffin said, when he came back, they asked him about it. It'll still come up. And they asked him, he said, well, Bud Ford and my agent said I should not do that press conference. Now, that's 3 years later. It's too late then. It's 3 years later. But I told him, Lane, you should leave. He didn't want to. And I felt I let my university down that night because I should have told him, no matter what, Lane, go out the back door and leave. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to really say why he was going. And why he was going was because as a dream job. He had always wanted to be there. He'd been from Southern California, wanted to be there. And that's kind of the way it went.
Did y'all know the craziness was going on outside?
Yes. I came in, and it was started when I came in. I could see the students gathering. And the students were trying to get into the building. We had to call security to keep them from getting in the building. It was a bad night. There's only two times, I'll mention now, there's only two times I felt like how could I have changed it different? I was very disappointed at Peyton Manning didn't win the Heisman.
Mm-hmm.
I was responsible of that group to try to make that happen. It didn't happen. That bothered me, and certainly the Lane Kiffin thing is still out there. And they did a 15-year deal. He came up, the guy called me, wanted me to talk about it. I didn't at the time. I just let it go because I didn't think there was a reason to. But that's generally what happened. I told him to leave, and he didn't want to, and it went that way.
Talking about Peyton and the Heisman, I think if history could do a redo, we might get a redo on that
Right.
one.
Well, Peyton, we had a plan at the beginning of the season, that season, when he announced he was coming back. Archie Manning, the president of the university at the time, Philip Fulmer, a group of us met, and we decided there were certain things we were going to do along promotion of the Heisman. Everybody agreed on that. And so I asked the question, I said, what happens if it goes south? What do we do? And Archie and everybody agreed we're not going to do any more. And so we didn't. And what went south was Peyton's not on national TV, plays at Kentucky, 5 touchdowns, 525 yards, and Woodson returns a kickoff, and they win. And that changed the whole scenario to say, hey, maybe it's time for a defensive back. But Peyton had basically moved past all the other contenders. Ryan Leaf and all the other contenders, they were out of the way. I mean, he had already surpassed what it took to there, and I don't think they didn't believe who Peyton Manning was. But now most people know who Peyton Manning is.
I would say that is for sure correct.
Right.
Would you go do the job you started out doing today under today's conditions versus what I'm saying when you started in '66? Would you get into this profession knowing how it is today if you were given the opportunity today?
Well, at the time I went in to being in media relations, certainly I had the skills necessary to do it. And as the skills changed, the procedures changed, and I was able to find quality people who knew those changes. For me to go in, if I was at their age, yes. For me to try to take it now, probably not. I wouldn't have enough skills to handle the social media, to handle what they're doing with the internet and all that other kinds of things. So the skill level has changed. I could probably get the job based on experience, but I would have to have a lot of people around me who have those skills. And I think that's the change. That's what I would say about it. When I go into it, yes, I loved every minute of it. Being a historian, I love every minute of it. I love the opportunity to go find something that I filed 40 years ago, which I did today a couple of times for things that are important to somebody now that can use it. So I was always the fact figure, the stat guy. You know, there was a record that I thought that would never be broken. Gene McKever scored 21 touchdowns in 1929. And I'm thinking, I don't think anybody will ever break that record. Well, this year, Dylan Sampson scored 22. So the records that we think aren't there are someday going to be, and all that information we had about McKever flowed right into that change like you did with what you did with Pat Summitt, and the girl has a baby. And so those are the types of things that I really like, but I would stay in it if I could. I would be short, I think, on the skills it's necessary for do this job right now. Those guys are working hard 24/7. It doesn't let up. Recruiting never lets up. Stories come out all the time during the day. I mean, they're working 7 days a week. It's tough job.
Is it good for college athletics that athletes now are paid?
It's a changing world, and we don't know where that world is going to go right now. You had 2 major things that have come into it. Obviously, the NIL, name and likeness. When I first talked about name and likeness, I was thinking some guy was going to get free hamburgers at McDonald's or something. And that has quickly changed to something else. But I think also the elimination of the transfer rule has added to it. And the university, I thought the NCAA was going to maybe implement that again, where you would get 1 free transfer unless your coach left. And if you transferred again, you would have to sit out. Well, that did not happen. That may be the one thing that might squeeze it down some in my mind. Certainly, it's a totally different world that the coach is dealing with. To recruit a freshman and bring him up and let him grow and teach and improve his skills, improve his body, and get to be a senior and be a great player, that development core of it is limited because that freshman player may decide if he didn't get to play this year, may not be quite ready, he's going to transfer. So coaches are facing a real challenge with that. And some coaches have left the field and talked about that's the part that bothers them. And old school or wherever their teaching were on coaching has a lot to do with that. So where it goes, I have no idea. Some point in time, there will need to be some kind of control. I don't know who will make that decision, but obviously it's pretty widespread right now.
Is there a favorite place for you on the UT campus? I mean, is there a spot that is like Bud Ford's place where no matter what day or time of the day or what have you, that's a place he can go when he feels really good?
Well, my first office that I shared with Haywood in the stadium. We had an office there, that particular office, after the athletic department moved to Stokely Center when it was built in '66. I stayed in Stokely really my whole career. In fact, they were not, when I retired in 2011, they didn't open the new building till I went back as an historian to get a spot. So I would say that I still remember being in the Athletic Association building, knowing that upstairs in the corner office is where General Nealon was. And that, to me, was a special thing. I never met General Nealon. Certainly Gus was the link to me to talk about General Nealon, Gus Manning. He always had great stories. I would have liked to met him. The one thing I often wanted to know, what if General Nealon had not coached football? What if he had been in the military, as he was, a full-time? Because he came out of West Point, 1917-18, when a lot of great generals were out there. MacArthur, you had Patton, you had Omar Bradley, you had Eisenhower. He would have been right in that group. Would he have been a guy who might have run for president? I don't know. But his military background, every time there was a situation with Nealon, they called him back as an engineer in '35 for Panama Canal, and then in World War II he was in Burma. And there he had great respect of those generals. In fact, he was aide-de-camp to MacArthur at one time. And so I often wondered, where would the general be if he hadn't been a football coach? For Tennessee, I'm glad he was a football coach because he certainly established a background, a heritage here that we still respect. And the teams he had were great, and his ability to coach and lead was great. But I think it'd be interesting to see where he would if he stayed military.
I will ask you one more question. My goodness, the campus has changed dramatically.
Right.
And maybe this is unfair of me to say this, but when I first got here, I loved that it just felt really kind of folksy and accessible, and I could even find places to park, and I didn't have to worry about it, And it's gotten so big and so, for lack of a better word, sort of polished and professional. And me, again, being sort of you use the word old school, talking about things, maybe that's where I am. I kind of hate seeing a lot of that go away. I feel like some of that has gone away. And the University of Tennessee, I've always thought, had such a real personal touch to it. I worry about that fading.
Well, when I was in school, the tuition was $75. 19C, I paid $75, okay? And my classes were on what we called the Hill. And when I graduated from high school at West High School, you said, where are you going to school? I said, I'm going to the Hill. We didn't really say UT. Certainly it grew a lot. And I was in the area where they did all the urban renewal, when they took those houses away and built the track and built a swimming pool and fraternity houses and all that renewal. So that changed pretty quickly. I do think one thing has changed for the good, and that's the look of the campus. that generalized entrances are well established. And before it was like, here's this campus stuck in the middle of a residential area. And I do think aesthetically, looking at it, there are definitive places coming in. They've done a good job with architecture and maintaining some buildings. It has grown. Parking is a huge problem because every parking lot becomes a building. And because in housing and the change in Cumberland Avenue is so drastic that you and I would never even think of what it used to look like.
Can't recognize it.
Right, can't recognize. So those things are doing, and they want to take it close to 40,000. I mean, that's the goal, evidently. I've heard Dr. Plowman talk about that, and so it is a challenge. It's a big campus, but yet it does have a small heart. And if you were in the business college, and then you're with that group of people, there's a heart there. You may not be the total campus, but whatever your major is, that's a pretty good shore group, and that's the closeness I see there. You know what the biggest building on campus is?
Is it Student Union?
The Student Union.
Yeah, it's huge.
It's the biggest building on campus, and it is a center point of a lot of going on, and it's really a fine functional building. Plenty of places for them to eat, study, meet. It's really a good thing. But I agree with you. It's not that small campus anymore, but yet it is the major university here. And when I was in school, it's a land grant college.
Right.
So I had ROTC. I had to take ROTC the first year. Everybody did because it's a land grant college. Now, I'm not sure they're doing that now. It's more voluntary, but yet that says something about the school and its growth and the way it's going. I think Dr. Plowman is doing an excellent job of leadership in that regard.
Anything I failed to cover that you wanted to address?
No, I didn't. I didn't say anything about some special games. I could. You got a minute?
If we got the time, let's do it. I would love to hear special games.
There are some games, obviously, that come up. I may not remember all the scores, but there are games. There's a miracle at Notre Dame in '91. We played a game in 1985 against Vanderbilt when Tennessee, if they won that game, they were going to play in the Sugar Bowl against Miami, which they won. Well, we went to that game. That's the one time I said Tennessee's going to win this game. There's no question they're going to win this game, and then we did. And as you go into the '98 national championship was won, but there's one point in time that people don't realize: athletics is ebb and flow. You're climbing up the mountain, or you're going down. When 1988, Tennessee was 0-6. Johnny Majors the coach, 0-6, not doing very well. About ready to run Coach Majors out of town. So we go to Memphis to play Memphis State, Tiger High as I would call them. And we win that game. We win the next 5, and we finish the 1988 season 5-6. You know what happened in '89 and '90? 2 SEC championships. The lowest of the low for Coach Majors turned into one of the highest of the highs. 0-6, not looking good. 5-6 better. And we built that to be 89 and 90 championships. So whenever you think, even to some extent, about maybe where a current basketball team is, things not going so well, sometimes you got to get to the low spot to turn it around and go to the high spot. And there's been a few of those times in there. I remember one time Coach Battle, we weren't playing very well. We were playing Kentucky. And he changed and called it the Liberty formation. He put in an extra guard, and we just mowed Kentucky down and went on to a bowl game. So that's the things I see. I can't remember all the scores. I could go look them up. I don't remember them all. I remember games, last-second games. I remember a great picture of Larry Severs in the end zone with Gus with a briefcase behind him. Everybody's seen that picture. But there's been some of those. But I always thought about the time when we were not so good, what turned us around to go back to the top.
Was there a coach you most enjoyed seeing lose to UT?
Lose to UT. Well, Coach George Caffigo, Tennessee coach there and player, did not like Vanderbilt very much. He kind of instilled a lot of Vanderbilt. I don't know why. My wife wonders, why does everybody hate Vanderbilt? I don't know what it was, but no, not really. I think the one thing people don't understand, the fan bases of the schools are pretty adamant about where they are. The employees work with other employees at other schools. Some of my closest friends are SID people, scorekeepers, everybody around the SEC are my close friends. Whether our teams are fighting each other during the game, that's one thing. When the whistle's over, we're still friends.
Mm-hmm.
We still do the same job. And that's the part that people don't understand. There's a lot of coaches that off record you think you'd never talk to them, and they're pretty close friends with who they're competing against. Fans don't see that, but if you worked in the profession that I'm in, that's part of it. An example is when we played Kentucky and Vanderbilt, we travel by car.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you need when you travel by car? Parking passes.
Mm-hmm.
And we always had an agreement. So many parking passes to each of us because we're both in that. Things like that went on that were unique. And in fact, three of the guys, a guy named Tony Neely at Kentucky is going into COSIDA Hall of Fame this year. I'll probably go to Orlando. A guy named John Painter, who worked for me, also is going in that Hall of Fame. Got Scotty Rogers, who was at the conference office, is going in this year. And a couple of those guys are getting 25-year awards. A guy named Larry White at Alabama. We were part of a media coordination team that runs the Southeastern Conference Championship in football and basketball tournament. And so we're pretty close in that. So that's a uniqueness that I certainly enjoyed to this day.
We appreciate your time. We truly
All
do.
right.